Hey everyone! In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Jobu Tupaki, the villain from the film Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Before we go further, it should be said that the title of a villain is loosely applied to Jobu, given that there are deeper antagonistic forces in the film, one of which is a parental rejection that has been passed down from the older generation to the next. With that said, while hopefully none of us would ever reach the existential crisis that Jobu faced, her character is still very much a relatable one that has resonated with audiences worldwide, not just for her struggles with finding meaning for existing, but also with the notion of handling hardships and rejection in life. Jobu's central trait in the film is her struggle with the concept of nihilism. As with most philosophical concepts, there are many variants and forms of nihilism, but to keep it simple, nihilism is the pessimistic notion that there is no meaning in life, that each one of us are insignificant, worthless specks in a vast, infinite universe, and hence nothing we do really matters. For Jobu, formerly known as Joy in the Alphaverse, this perspective was reached after being pressured by her mother to learn the skill of universe jumping. With the shattering of the figurative clay pot, Joy sees the multiverse in its infinite scope and experiences everything, everywhere, all at once. From this collective experience, Jobu reaches the conclusion that nothing matters, given that for every universe where an action is taken, there exists another universe where the opposite action occurs. The name of Jobu Tupaki itself has no meaning whatsoever, as hinted at by Evelyn when she equates her name to just making sounds. This also appears to be confirmed by the filmmakers. Given that Jobu is a symbol of nihilism, we can't help but examine the philosophical implications of the concept when analyzing her character. As we'll see, the concept of nihilism is not only impractical for living, but also subject to several flaws which we'll get to later. Of course, with such a pessimistic view, Jobu is largely a depressed and downtrodden individual, one with hardly any hint of joy in her expression. After all, if nothing matters, then what's the point in any emotion? What would be the point in living anyway? The only small traces of happiness we see are in the moments when she appears to have fun through wreaking havoc. The belief of nihilism is one possible route to hedonism, or being pleasure-seeking. For Jobu, the only form of enjoyment comes in the form of bending the laws of physics and making each universe her playground. In believing that there is no meaning in life, Jobu branches out to an extension of nihilism, namely moral nihilism, the belief that there is no right or wrong, and that good and evil are merely social constructs. This belief is expressed in the lives that she casually takes. As wacky and comical as it may be portrayed, Jobu is still responsible for the death of several individuals. The fact that they are turned into confetti does not change this fact. Of course, in light of her perspective, she feels her actions are harmless, as any action she takes will be counteracted in another universe. But try telling that to the relatives of these victims who are unaware of the multiverse. And even if they were aware of it, it's likely that this knowledge would hardly be of any comfort to them. Not to mention that these victims are likely just the tip of the iceberg, given that she appears to have a tyrannical rule in at least one universe and caused a war in the Alphaverse which resulted in the extinction of cows. So no, we cannot agree with the notion that her actions are without consequence. Furthermore, we can certainly poke some holes in the beliefs that Jobu puts forth, the first of which is that there is no right or wrong, and secondly, that there is no objective truth. In her own words, Jobu mentions to Evelyn that the concept of right is a tiny box invented by people who are afraid, and I know what it feels like to be trapped inside that box. But does that notion really hold up? Is the concept of right and wrong merely a social construct we invented for ourselves? Think about it. In every society, in any part of the world, there is an underlying code of morality that we generally agree on. This doesn't mean there aren't any morally ambiguous gray areas, but there are some clear-cut black and white areas. If someone were to say, "I would like to steal from you because I'm greedy and it makes me happy," we wouldn't hesitate to label that person's intention as wrong. But why is that person wrong? If there's no such thing as right or wrong and it's all a subjective opinion, then who are we to prop ourselves up as judge over them? Why should our opinion of what is right be deemed more valid than the person intending to steal? Think of it this way. If you say it's wrong to steal and someone else says it's okay to steal, and you then criticize that person's viewpoint, you are effectively appealing to a third external standard that agrees with yours, which then makes your viewpoint the correct one. Or in other words, to identify a crooked line, you must first know what a straight line is. We can't say that what is deemed right is simply what makes a person happy or what leads to the well-being of people. Case in point, the Nazis were doing what made them happy and what they felt was for their well-being, but no one in their right mind would lend support to their actions. And neither can we say that what is right is simply a result of the majority's view. If the Nazis had succeeded in taking over the world, would their viewpoint be then proven right? Again, no rational person would say that they were. At this point, you might be saying, well, that all works well in the real world, but this doesn't take into account the concept of the multiverse. In response, that is true. As the multiverse is still a fictional concept, we can only speculate or form a conjecture without complete evidence. The argument mentioned would fall apart if there truly is a universe out there where it's objectively acceptable to steal for the sake of greed. But if there isn't, then Jobu's concept of moral relativism is false, and it should be objective instead. And as for the second point of objective truth, Alpha Waymond mentions that Jobu does not believe in that notion. But if we claim that there is no objective truth, then is that claim itself a statement of objective truth? If so, then the notion that there is no objective truth is a self-refuting statement. So we see that Jobu's perspective, especially in relation to nihilism, has several potential flaws that can be explored even in the multiverse. But there is one more aspect we can discuss. After Evelyn fails to change her mind, Jobu takes the only decision she has left, to face her demise via the everything bagel. But this choice is a rather perplexing one. Sure, Jobu likely has vast knowledge of the multiverse, but there is one question that perhaps she herself cannot answer. What lies beyond the bagel? What happens upon her multiversal death? Nowhere does she reveal any knowledge of this, which makes her willingness to meet her demise all the more troubling. Yes, it's always an absolute tragedy when someone decides that life isn't worth living. However, if you don't know what lies beyond the grave, then perhaps the willful decision to leave this earth is the riskiest move you can ever make. Strictly from a figurative sense, you might be going out of the frying pan and into the fire. But back to Jobu. To her credit, her intentions are relatively mild, with relative being the key word. She looked into the abyss and blinked. But her endgame is only aimed at herself, and not towards the entire multiverse, which somewhat softens her character. At the core, Jobu is still a lost and scared girl yearning for someone to understand her. The fact that of all people she chose her mother, the very person who put her through this ordeal, speaks volumes. Jobu's change of heart at the end reveals another trait of us as humans, that at the core we are driven by emotion and not by logic. If you think about it, nothing has changed in terms of her moral argument and the perceived emptiness of her choices, which confirms that emotion was the only driving force for her change. All that talk about being meaningless was just a cover for the emotional void she feels. But since that's the case, then Jobu's nihilism is somewhat misguided, because according to her logic, She should take comfort in the fact that in another universe there is another version of Evelyn that loves her daughter the way she's always wanted. Jobu would have saved a lot of trouble by first jumping to that version of herself instead. But then again, that's the point of the film. It's not meant for a logical conclusion, but more of an emotional gut punch. At the end, it's not fully clear as to Jobu's fate at the film's closing. Does she merge with Joy from Evelyn's universe? There aren't many places left for her to go now after all the damage she's caused to the multiverse. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and stay positive.